And welcome to our January History Happy Hour. My name is Cody H. I serve as Director of Education and Interpretation here at Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, coming to you from the museum offices in the historic Schmucker House. And we are already, once we get through this evening's program, more than halfway, if you can believe it or not, through our 2024-2025 History Happy Hour season. And so if this is your first one or if you've been with us several times, like to welcome you to these programs. If you're not already a member of Seminary Ridge Museum, we invite you to explore those options on our website. And I'll drop that link into the chat as we get going. We have a backlog of History Happy Hours going back several years on our member portal, which comes as a benefit of membership. You can see those throughout the course of the past several years, and then many of these do eventually end up on our YouTube page as well. But if you are interested in more information about membership, I'll provide a link to that here in just a moment. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. I'm going to share my screen. We have a lot coming up, even though we're in the middle of winter. We do have our first several events of 2025, starting with this evening and continuing through this weekend and beyond. Give it a moment to bring up my screen. I believe you should all be able to see that. So this weekend, we are going to commemorate Martin Luther King Day, which of course will be next Monday, January 20th. We have a two-day series of events. The first will be this Sunday, January 19th, two free events that will be taking place in Valentine Hall, just next to the museum, where at 1 o'clock, we're going to be showing a documentary film, King in the Wilderness, which is an extraordinary documentary. If you don't live locally and are not able to join us, I would recommend checking it out. If you have a subscription to Max, formerly HBO Max, it is available there. But just an extraordinary documentary that we're looking forward to being able to screen. It focuses on the last 3 years of King's life, from the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 until his assassination in 1968. Runs just shy of 2 hours. I believe it's 1 hour and 51 minutes. So if you're able to join us for that, we invite you to do so. Following that, same place in the Valentine Hall Auditorium, we'll have at 3:30, yours truly presenting 50 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. and the legacy of the Civil War, where we'll be taking a look at how he utilized the examples the history provided him from Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation and Frederick Douglass, you name it, of the Civil War era, and how he sort of used those lessons as a template a century later, as he is now fighting the legacy of the Civil War in his own time. So those will both be taking place on Sunday. They're both free. No registration is required. As I mentioned then, on Monday as well, on Martin Luther King Day itself, we'll have another special event. It is our final of 4 community free days going back to last June that were generously funded by the Robert C. Hoffman Charitable Endowment Trust. What this means, if you live locally, if you're an Adams County resident, you get free admission to the museum with an ID. 1 per party is fine. Even if you're a member already of the museum, feel free to bring some family along. This is just a way for us to ensure engagement with the museum by folks here in the community. And so we thank the Hoffman Trust for its support throughout the past 7 months of this series of community free days. Our Fridays on the Ridge are going to be returning as far as in-person Friday afternoon programming in a few weeks at the end of January and the beginning of February. I'll be doing a pair of programs. You can see those topics there. The first one is about the governor of Virginia, an editor from Center, Pennsylvania, who are debating the issues of the secession crisis in late 1860, early 1861. And now on February 7th, I'll be talking about a series of op-eds, to use the modern term, that Frederick Douglass writes about Robert E. Lee in the aftermath of Lee's death in 1870. Caleb Kuzmierczak, our director of museum operations, he'll be doing one on Valentine's Day on February 14th. We'll have more information on that soon, but I believe Caleb is working on something around the topic of love letters that soldiers and their spouses send back and forth from the home front to the battlefield. On February 15th, we're going to have our second annual Tacos in Trivia, which is co-presented by us as well as Addressing Gettysburg podcast. It's family-friendly general trivia, but not about generals. There will be tacos provided. It's BYOB, but we'll have water, lemonade, and iced tea provided as well. You can find more information on purchasing tickets for this and how teams work if you go to seminaryridgemuseum.org/events, which has a calendar of all of these items that I'm mentioning this evening as well. And then we have our nonfiction book club continuing throughout the course of 2025. Our first of the year is going to be on February 18th. We're reading The Thin Light of Freedom by Edward Ayers. The library does have a link on its website to register for this. It's not required. They just ask that you do sign up to give a general head count, but by all means, feel free to just stop by. It'll be in Schmucker House at 1 o'clock the third Tuesday of every other month. And Adams County Library does have copies of the book available for each of these as well. So if you live locally, have an Adams County Library card. If you go to the second floor desk, you can get a copy of the book there. And then finally, our last other major event that is coming up in the foreseeable future is our annual Winter Symposium, co-presented with the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. You can see the slate of speakers on your screen there. And collectively, we're talking about underrated MVPs of the Gettysburg campaign. That's as far as we're basically taking how much we're telling you in advance. You'll see some teasers here and there over the course of the next several weeks, but this is going to be the first time that we're ever keeping our actual topics individually quiet. So you can sign up for the in-person or virtual option, and you'll basically learn about who specifically we're talking about as the event itself is happening. We're giving that a little bit of a twist. The in-person registration is filling up. So if you are interested in coming to the in-person version of that, I would recommend getting onto seminaryridgemuseum.org/events and signing up for that soon. Otherwise, we do have the virtual option available as well. Next month's History Happy Hour, we're going to welcome back an old friend of the museum, our former executive director, Pete Mealy. Now he is at Susquehanna National Heritage Area in Wrightsville, but he's joining us virtually to talk about the environmental history of July 1st, 1863. That'll be Friday, February 21st at 6:30 p.m. Information on registering for that will be available soon. And to give you a sense of what our last few look like, after tonight with Brian, next month with Pete, we'll have Jonathan Steplik in March and Gary Manville, a sculptor. This will be a unique twist on what has traditionally been historians who are presenting. Gary Manville, a historical sculptor, will be presenting in April. And that leads us to our speaker for this evening. Without further ado, I'll introduce Bryan Cheeseboro. He's a historian of the American Civil War, has been a frequent speaker to the Rock Creek Civil War Roundtable. He's currently a ranger with the National Park Service at the Civil War Defenses of Washington, D.C., and is a former employee of the National Archives. Tonight, he'll discuss safeguarding the Union, the early days of the Civil War Defenses of Washington, from Fort Sumter to First Bull Run, April to July 1861. Please welcome National Park Service Ranger Bryan Cheeseboro.
Thank you, everyone. It is great to be with you tonight, and thank you, Cody, for the introduction. Really am so impressed and very appreciative to see all of you, and thank you so much for joining me just for what I just want to share with you. So a little bit more about myself. I am actually born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in a house that was built in the 20th century, where the Fort Stevens battlefield is. It's just like right down the street from the remains of Fort Stevens. I'm going to guess that more than maybe a couple of you at least have been to Fort Stevens before. I'll just say this. I don't know how many of you can say that you actually grew up on a Civil War battlefield, but I can. So anyway, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay. All right, so everyone can see that. Let's see, hold on. Oop. All right, oops, hold on, back. Okay, so the topic is the Civil War Defenses of Washington in 1861, as mentioned, and that's me. So one thing about this subject, DC and the Civil War and everything, and the Civil War defenses. A lot of people, I think, I may be wrong, but a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily know a lot about DC and the Civil War. We know about Lincoln, certainly know where DC is, but and the Army of the Potomac or whatever. But in terms of like, from DC in the war, what happened in DC during the war and such like that, I'm not sure many people really know, even those who are big Civil War enthusiasts. I could be wrong, but at least that's the impression I sometimes get. And by the way, I've got I think about 35 slides, and I hope we'll be able to get through everything. But anyway, a lot of times questions come up like this one. You can see that I copied from Reddit. Was there ever an official reason as to why the Confederate Army chose not to invade Washington, D.C. in the beginning days of the Civil War when the city was completely unprotected? So that's kind of a manifest of what I just said, that the city was completely unprotected. It wasn't unprotected. That's just it. But somebody is convinced that it is. I've heard other things. And Another thing I'll point out is this is, of course, a clip from the movie Gettysburg, which I'm sure that all of you have seen. And I just wanted to share this. You might remember it, but I just thought I'd refresh your memory. So this is just a couple minutes. I hope this plays okay. And it has Spanish subtitles too, by the way. Fine, Dick. Well, that's good. How's the leg? Oh, it's all right. Can't walk? Guess you'll have to ride. You can't do that. You'd be the perfect target. We're going up there today and we're going to break that line. And when the Yankees run away, there's going to be an open road all the way to Washington. Maybe we'll win it today. And today will be the last day. Maybe today. I got it right. Hello? I'll see you at the top. Okay. Let's get out of that. Hold on. Sorry, I had to stop this from sharing. Whoops. Let me figure out how to move this forward.
Brian, I think if you hit escape on your keyboard, it should exit the video and then
there it is right there. Hold on.
Yeah.
I think it went all the way out in a sec. Okay. All right, hold on. All right. So anyway, you saw from that, and you might remember the scene where Dick Garnett, who we know does not survive that attack, and he really didn't, says, we're going up there, we're going to break that line, and the Yankees run away, and everything like that. And I noticed the side glance from Armistead, and he's just like, hey, you're really putting yourself in danger. But when I saw that this time, I'm thinking he's like, they have all those guns defending DC, don't you? But anyway, but that scene right there, that movie, I think really communicates that idea that somehow DC is this undefended city. At least I think so. So what I want to talk about tonight is this. This is an outline of my program. Was DC in danger of attack, invasion? And was DC even in danger of secession? I don't know if many of you ever considered that DC at the beginning of the war was what I call a border city. We've all heard of border states, Maryland, Kentucky. And if a border state is a place that remains loyal to the Union, but has slavery, DC in 1861 certainly was that place. Although slavery ends in April 1862, but that's another program for another time. Anyway, so just in terms of building these Civil War defenses, where the first forts were built, talk about that. When and where the first forts were built, which was the first fort, and also what was the Arlington line, very important, kind of the key, I think, to the Civil War defenses. And what were the first defenses by First Bull Run? And that ultimate question, could the Confederate Army have made a serious attack on DC after First Bull Run? So part one, threats to DC.
Brian, just in case you're not aware, your screen did stop sharing entirely. So
Oh, okay, okay. I'm sorry. Hold on a second.
no worries.
Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Screen sharing. All right. So if everybody can see that, you can see that, Cody?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks.
No worries.
Anyway, these are some of the rumors that are taking. Oh, I got to go back to the other screen. Hold on. I missed a couple. All right. So this is a calendar of just the events of April 1861, Confederate events that are Confederate victories are, so to speak, are in gray and the Union in blue. The bombardment of Fort Sumter takes place. Lincoln calls for 75,000 90-day volunteers. Even though it's 3 months, that's kind of what I think is the most famous enlistment drive, the most well known by people of the Union of the Civil War. And April 17th, Virginia votes to secede, and that's ratified on May 23rd. That's a very important point to this program, by the way. That month between voting and then actually formally seceding. Companies of Pennsylvania troops arrive in D.C. on the 18th. The Baltimore riot, 19th. Lee resigns, sends his resignation to the War Department. And then a Union ship at Pawnee arrives on the Potomac. Lincoln says on the 24th, I don't believe there's any North. We've heard that before. The 7th New York State Militia, that's the what they call the Silk Stocking Regiment. They arrive in D.C. They're actually a 30-day unit, not even just a 3-month unit of first responders. But by the end of the month, there's about 11,000 soldiers in and around D.C. So also on April 15th, this British ambassador to the United States, this is what he had to say. He talks about civil war is now imminent, the loss of Fort Sumter, and he says the immediate apprehensions, and I have a lot of quotes in here, so I've tried to highlight things just to kind of summarize, but the immediate apprehensions of the government are for this city. The chiefs of the Southern Confederacy loudly declared their intention for attacking it immediately if the border states, Maryland and Virginia, joined them. And I also want to point out, I think another important thing for me about this program is that I hear sometimes people say about how the Confederacy just wanted to be left alone, just wanted to secede, didn't have any plans to invade. I want to also point out in this program that I believe that Confederate leaders had serious designs on DC itself, not just a matter of attacking the forts around protecting the city, but had serious designs on DC itself. And I've even believed that had, say, the city fallen, I think that the Confederate capital might have moved again. But that's just me. So rumors that went on, for instance, the Charleston floating battery, which was used at Fort Sumter, there was a rumor that that battery was heading north, perhaps to DC itself. On April 15th, the New York Times reported with satisfactory information that 20,000 rebels were immediately to march on DC because they had, quote, nothing else to do. Okay. And then also secessionists in DC. They're just like there were enslavers in DC, there were also secessionists, and they planned to blow up the Capitol and the Treasury building and burn the White House and other public buildings. And so I have accompanying this this picture from the War of 1812, where several public buildings, as we know, were burned in DC during the war. Real quick, I'll try to make this really fast. But back in the late 80s, I was working in DC. I was working for a law office. I was doing some courier work around town, delivering documents. And I remember going by the White House in the late 80s, back when you could still drive on Pennsylvania Avenue, in front of the White House, between the White House and Lafayette Square. And they were restoring the White House and stripped off the white paint from the White House. This was on the north side, I saw. And when they stripped it off, you could see the burn marks on the White House stone, which really blew me away. This thing really happened. And this is 50 years or so after it happened in the War of 1812 with the Civil War. So certainly, wow, if the Confederates could do something like that, what kind of statement could that make to the foreign recognition that they'd like to get from Britain and France? Couple items from the Richmond Examiner. From the mountaintops and to the valleys and the shores of the sea, there's a shout of fierce resolve to capture Washington City. This flight of abolition harpies shall come down from the black north to defile and brutalize the land. So our people can take this, and they will take it, is what this newspaper is saying. Another one from the Richmond Examiner again, Washington is in the weak point with our enemies. Their fears and preparations prove that they feel and know it. It is to Washington and the northern rabble is summoned. Cannot Virginians and other Southerners, Marylanders, those from Delaware, whatever it is, reach Washington before this multitudinous and disorderly rabble arrives? If companies and regiments and such will hurry on to Alexandria soon, very soon, Davis and Beauregard and Lee of Virginia will be there to lead them on. They're already talking about Lee. That's interesting. When he, just a few days after his own leaving the Union, well before he is taking command of the Army of Virginia, that's kind of interesting. He's already got his name in the papers in Richmond. This is Brigadier General Charles Pomeroy Stone, who was kind of an early, before the Army of the Potomac as we know it, before any of that. He was kind of Scott's right-hand man, who Scott went to him, Winfield Scott, by the way, went to him and asked, where is the rally point in defense of the city? Well, I don't really know. Scott says, make yourself the rally point to Charles Stone. This is where it mentions that Stone says the militia companies of the District of Columbia were the first to respond to the call of this 75,000 volunteers for 3 months. So I'm actually kind of proud of that myself. Approximately 2,000 officers and men were sworn into the United States service for 3 months enlistment. And they're guarding the approaches to the city and the protection of government property and buildings in and around Washington. So this is the reports of Charles Stone regarding the district volunteers in this 3-month service. But there were secessionists in DC. And this is what a special Washington correspondent wrote to the Atlanta Southern Confederacy. We're still under a reign of terror, though many of us have not refrained from fully or freely expressing our condemnation of the war policy of the administration and the folly and madness of the Black Republican Party. So these are a couple items from, these are in the National Archives. These are parts of compiled military service records. The one on the left is for, these are both companies, Company E of the 1st Virginia Infantry, Confederate Infantry, and Company H of the 7th Virginia. These are Washington volunteers. These are DC men who joined the Confederacy. This document on the left, I think, is really fascinating because it says there in the script, this company was formed in Washington, D.C. in December 1860, when South Carolina, secedes, for the purpose of enforcing the surrender of the district to Maryland or Virginia when either seceded from the late Union. So they're already planning this. And on the other side is the other one this is for a soldier, George McDaniel, showing that how many miles, I think this is also kind of neat, 77 miles from Washington to Culpeper Courthouse, Virginia, which I checked on GPS. It's still 77 miles, by the way. Just a couple of items right here showing that a lot of people really don't know much about DC Confederates. And I think I've found at least a couple hundred, maybe 300. So not many, but they do exist. But this is at the Gettysburg National Battlefield Park. They have a display there of Union and Confederate soldiers from different states, but for DC it has none. And in the Civil War Monitor Almanac, which came out a few years ago for DC, it also has none. Under that 16,534, that's the district, the number there at the bottom. And by the way, that 20,000 number for Maryland is not correct. It's really about 5,000. But that's, again, another subject later. So Black men did offer their services from the beginning of the war, but they were turned away. One man, Jacob Dodson, who was born free in Maryland, family worked for Thomas Hart Benton, a Democrat from Missouri, and Dodson got to go with John Fremont in some of his explorations in the 1840s. So he had some experience with that and everything. And in his time working in the Senate, Dodson working as a congressional aide, and he labored on the 1860 census, by the way. So he had a lot of experience with things, knew the government well enough, at least Congress, and the city and everything. So when the war started, he personally wrote to Secretary of War Simon Cameron and said that he could raise a unit of 300 Black men for the Union Army. Interesting that that's about the same number that I found of DC Confederates, of white soldiers. But anyway, Cameron refused his offer just to the point. He said, at this time, we're not accepting any enlistments from Black men. This is the Militia Act of 1793, which barred Black soldiers at that point in the war. But that does change later on. So for part two, building the defenses of Washington, and really is all about the bridges, at least for this program it is. But no, it's very important, very, very important to protect these bridges. And let me say now too that I think the greatest defense of the city was actually the natural defense, the Potomac River. It'd be a very, very different thing if this was some landlocked area where the government was, and not the Potomac River that separates Virginia from DC. Be very, very different, I believe. I mentioned earlier that DC troops were the first to enlist in Lincoln's call for first responders, in his call for 75,000 troops. They're also the first to cross this bridge. This is the Long Bridge, which stretches across the Potomac. This is from Harper's Weekly. And this is early on the morning of May 23rd, 24th. That is, as I mentioned, when Virginia formally secedes. So it is in the Confederacy. So before that, they're not sending troops into Virginia because Virginia might not join the Confederacy after all. But when it finally does, that's when Union troops go on the offensive and head straight into Virginia. I took it out for this program, but I paired this picture with the picture from D-Day, the Normandy invasion, where it shows the Allied troops getting off, the American troops getting off the landing craft, and you see them from behind. But this picture kind of reminds me of that same thing. So anyway, these items right here from the newspapers at 4 o'clock this morning. The troops went across the Long Bridge, loaded with picks and shovels and all manner of tools, and accompanied with full corps of carpenters and workmen. So they're certainly going with guns, but they're also going with tools to build forts. And from the New York Herald, our troops quartered in Georgetown, which is part of DC, the 69th, 5th, and 8th and 28th New York regiments proceed across what is known as the Chain Bridge. That's another bridge upriver from the Long Bridge, from the mouth of the Potomac Aqueduct, under the command of General McDowell. And I'm talking about 3 different bridges, very important bridges in this program. Mentioned before that DC troops were the first to join up and the first to cross the bridge. This is a soldier of the National Rifles of DC, the first regiment, the first company, and the first soldier ever raised to defend the Union against the rebels was in the city of Washington. Let it be known, too, that the first Union company to cross the Long Bridge was the National Rifles. That may have also been because they might have been something of guides. If they were, from the area, and knew the river, knew the bridge and everything like that, knew Northern Virginia, it might have also been something of, let me guide you, troops from New York, from Massachusetts, from Connecticut, or whatever. across this because we know the way, we know the area, we know Arlington or whatever it is. So go on. So I mentioned before about what were the first forts built, when, where, and everything. So I think it really comes down to a couple. One of them is Fort Runyon. And it was built in 7 weeks from May 24th to early July 1861. Oh, almost 1,500 perimeter yards, and that's much bigger. I think like twice the size of the next biggest fort in the Civil War defenses of Washington, which at its peak was 68 forts and 93 batteries. But this is way before that. They weren't all built at once. As the war goes on, they built some more, they built some more. But this is at least where we're starting with this. So anyway, about 1,500 yards, 23 guns, and it guards the Long Bridge. It was named after Brigadier General Theodore Runyon. This item where it shows it has the 30-pound Parrott rifles, Seacoast howitzers, 10 32-pounders, some pretty big guns. It guards, like I said, the Long Bridge and a couple roads that go basically right through it. So to get to DC, they'd have to go through this fort. Good luck with that for the Confederates to do so. Another bridge is the Aqueduct Bridge. This connects Georgetown with Arlington, the Roslyn area. The Key Bridge stretches across today. That's the Aqueduct Bridge on the right, a picture from the war looking into Georgetown. So it's actually looking north. These two men are standing on the Arlington Heights there. All that's left of that bridge today is that pier in the photo on the left with the Key Bridge in the back and Roslyn there, Roslyn City in the background. And by the way, all the forts I'm talking about today, focusing on basically with this, they're all gone. So it's pretty much downtown Arlington now, downtown Roslyn, they're kind of the same thing, just using those interchangeably. But anyway, Roslyn and Arlington. But all the forts there are basically gone. There's historic markers, but there's really no traces of these forts left. And I guess you could say, by the way, before I move on, that pier there, if you look in the photo, you can actually see it in the background. That's the same pier. That's all that's left from that photo. I believe all those buildings are gone. The Aqueduct Bridge is gone. Those trees are certainly gone. But all that's left is that pier right there. This is another fort, Fort Corcoran. I think that these two, Fort Runyon and Fort Corcoran, I believe that they're really the first, certainly the first of the biggest. This one's built after 3 weeks. Like I said, it's nowhere the size of Fort Runyon. But this is showing the 69th New York State Militia, who named the fort after Michael Corcoran, their commanding officer. And this shows, this is from Frank Leslie's Illustrated, showing the flag raised over the fort when they're still in the process of building it. So that's built in a few weeks, less time than the other, but after 3 weeks, this is what the fort looked like, at least according to the newspaper. And that's Georgetown back in the distance. This item is talking about the preparations over the river. This is, again, from the newspapers. And I apologize, I don't have the name of this paper, but where it says, the work accomplished by our soldier boys over the river speaks well for the skill of the officers and engineers, the perseverance and industry of the men in preparing the defense of their capital. And then the solid walls of Fort Corcoran, and best of all, the firm columns of our zealous volunteers show the defense we have upon our borders. So there's a lot of confidence in these men to getting this job done. And this shows the men in Fort Corcoran. You may have seen some of these photos before, but that's the 69th New York State Militia. This is the 3-month 69th. There were a number of 69th New Yorks in the Civil War, at least a couple, but this is the 3-month version, those 75,000 volunteers. And by the way, everyone in 1861 was a volunteer in the Civil War. The Chain Bridge is the last bridge here. Talking about this one is just upriver from Georgetown, and this shows Battery Martin Scott above the Chain Bridge. This is the DC side looking into Arlington there. And you see the bridge down below, and there's a battery on this side. Basically, if you took an elevator down from this bridge, from this battery right here, you'd come to another battery below it, and that guards the DC side of the Chain Bridge. And on the other side is Fort Ethan Allen, as well as Fort Marcy is not that far away from this location. This is what the bridge looked like during the war, the Chain Bridge. And this is basically the bridge flipped around, looking at the DC side there of the Potomac River. So this is the Virginia side closest to the bottom of the picture there, looking towards DC. And this is also on that same side at the ground level of the bridge. And you'll notice that sentry box there on the right. If you look, you can see it even with that same stain on the side of it down in the photo. This is that lower battery I was talking about, where you saw in the newspaper illustration. Going back to that real quick, you see it, newspaper illustration. This is the lower battery guarding the DC side of the Chain Bridge. There's a couple of dissimilar cannon there, some older cannon, but still sturdy, hardy volunteers making the effort to defend the Capitol. Early were photographed. Great thing about this photo, I think, is that I guess it was popular enough that in 1961, it was used in a Civil War centennial calendar. So I think that's kind of neat to see that. And that's the Chain Bridge today. I'm not sure. I think the left side is, I'm pretty sure that's the Virginia side. Yes, it is a Virginia side. And this side to the right of the picture is going towards DC. And so you can see a lot of, I guess enough, there is certainly land there and such, marshy land or whatever it is, underneath the bridge, but without the bridge to cross there, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get across for the Confederates. But anyway, like I said, very important to guard those bridges. So the Chain Bridge still does exist. The Long Bridge, I guess, still exists in some ways, I showed earlier, or at least some version of a Long Bridge, but that's used now for the Virginia Railway Express to get across into Virginia from DC. The Aqueduct Bridge, like I said, is gone, replaced by the Key Bridge. This is the Defenses of Washington, July 29th, 1861, where it talks about these 4 forts and 8 batteries. Fort Runyon, as I mentioned. Fort Ellsworth is another one. Fort Corcoran mentioning there, Fort Albany. And just basically this report from Henry Hunt, who is the chief of artillery and later becomes chief of artillery for the Army of the Potomac. Basically his report to General Stoneman. This is in the official records where it's 4 forts and 8 batteries by July 29th. So this is basically what exists at the time of First Bull Run. This is what the Confederates would have had to face had they tried to attack DC. So a few topographical maps, hopefully to put this all in some kind of perspective. So this is Fort Corcoran right there. You see where I'm circling. There's the Aqueduct Bridge and a few other forts like Fort Bennett, built in May 1861, and Fort Haggerty, a few smaller forts. Certainly didn't take as much time to build, but they're also charged with that same duty of guarding the Aqueduct Bridge. There's Georgetown there, just in the upper right-hand corner. That college right there is Georgetown University today, Georgetown College originally. And showing some of the other forts, a few built later on. We move on. That's Fort Daniel Woodbury, who supervised the building of the Arlington line. And he had a fort named after him, Fort Woodbury, which was built in 1861. And he actually dies during the war. And a lot of times when somebody died, like forts were renamed. Like the one right here, Fort Strong was originally Fort DeKalb, but it was renamed when George Crockett Strong died in 1863. But the interesting thing about Fort Woodbury is that it was named Fort Woodbury from the beginning, never had to be renamed because he did die later on, but the fort, of course, just kept the name. And this is the southern end of the same map there. This is the northern part right here, but the southern end where it shows Fort Runyon there, that big shape there, kind of towards the right. Fort Jackson is right at the very southern end, the Virginia end of the Long Bridge there in the right corner, right side of this picture. Other forts, Fort Albany, Fort Craig begins in August, Fort Tillinghast. These are forts, the ones on the left side of this picture, Fort Tillinghast and Fort Craig, which are built after First Bull Run. So this is kind of a response to that Confederate victory, and also Fort Richardson a little later. So they did build more forts after it was over with, after that battle was over with. Arlington House, there's no fort built there, but if you're in DC today and you're driving across the Arlington Memorial Bridge from the Lincoln Memorial towards Virginia, towards Arlington Cemetery, you can look up and you can see Arlington House. The Arlington Bridge, Memorial Bridge, was not there during the war, but you can get a sense of how high that was because that of course that house was there. Arlington House was there. Lee's house was there during the war, and if you're up on the front porch of Arlington House when you're visiting Arlington Cemetery and Lee's house there, you can see the whole city, and so that's what they would have seen during the Civil War as well. So it was important. I've seen photos where the Union troops have occupied the house after Lee left and everything, and it's very important to do so. Part of this Civil War defenses of Washington. There's also this ship, the USS Pawnee, which had 8 9-inch guns and a pair of 12-pounders, which was a match for anything the Confederates mounted against her, either ashore or on the water. So that's also on the Potomac River. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the Navy and their part in the Civil War defenses of Washington during this time. And this ship arrived, as I mentioned, it arrived in April 1861. So part 3, and this is the last part. I'm still looking at the time. We have a little bit. So because the Confederates have made a serious attack on DC after First Bull Run. This quote here, this is from that special Washington correspondent. Of course, we all shed tears, but some were more tears of joy than of sorrow. We know that First Bull Run was a Confederate victory. Not that we rejoice at the death of any man or victory over the Constitution and the Union, but because it was a glorious victory over the vile presumptiveness of a wicked and unholy sectional organization for the overthrow and utter annihilation of the people and institutions meaning slavery, of the 15 sovereign states. They are thoroughly fortifying themselves behind their works on Arlington Heights, that's the Civil War defenses, where they will rest for the present. There they will coax an attack. I am not of the opinion that General Beauregard intends this to be a war of conquest, simply one of defense. Beauregard actually wanted to press on the attack and further his advance towards Washington City. He didn't get his way though, really. But anyway, this illustration shows in the battle the death of General Francis Bartow of the Georgia Brigade during the Battle of First Bull Run. And he is right there raising his fist. He's been shot. He's raising his fist just below the flag, cheering his men on, at least on the battlefield. We'll see what these men like these of this 8th Georgia, this Georgia Brigade, excuse me, thought about attacking DC. So First Bull Run was a 9-hour battle. All day. It's July, hottest month of the year, at least around in DC it is for sure. And if you have been in DC during the summer, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, this is what I just picked 3 quotes here. There's a lot. And this program, of course, it's not the be-all, end-all of the subject, but just to give you some information. So one quote from this Colonel Simeon Gibbons of the 10th Virginia Infantry, he says, I don't believe until that place is taken, DC, or leveled in ashes, can we hope for peace. General James Longstreet, who was a brigadier general at the Battle of First Bull Run, he says Alexandria probably would have fallen into our hands without a struggle because Alexandria was occupied in May by the Union troops and held throughout the war. But anyway, and we might have forced the enemy to evacuate his works south of the Potomac, but very likely not until after a fight in which our loss would have been greater than the object to be accomplished would have justified. So he doesn't really see much good it would have done. And we could have transferred our line to the banks of the Potomac, but we could not have held it. This is his opinion, and would not eventually have been compelled to abandon it. So he doesn't think that it could have been held by this Confederate army in the field. And this last quote, this soldier, Lieutenant Thomas Pitts, don't know what he looked like. This is just an unidentified photo, but I used it for effect. The one of this unidentified Confederate soldier and his wife and child. Lieutenant Thomas Pitts says that he's writing to his wife as he believed the Army's next move would be against the Arlington Heights and Alexandria. So he says, if so, I tremble for the result, for I assure you that many, very many of us have seen our homes and friends for the last time. And that is a very different opinion of what we saw the actor portraying General Richard Garnett saying in the movie Gettysburg. So this last slide, this is where it ends. So this shows the defenses by September 30th, 1861. This is in the Adjutant General's report, General Order number 18, in the official records, I believe. Yeah. So anyway, this shows where all the defenses are. Basically, it's kind of circling the defenses. These are the ones on the first side are in Virginia, Fort Lyon, Fort Ellsworth. Fort Ward is there. That's still a place you can actually visit. None of these forts, by the way, many of them are gone completely. Some of them are bits and pieces, but at least the site exists. And the neat thing for me is that you can get a sense if you go to these sites, like you see the terrain, you see the elevation. Like a lot of places, you'll be standing like where a marker is, and you'll see like you can look downhill. Like when I went to Fort Lyon, that site, that's where the Huntington Metro Station is today. And you can look down the hill from there, so you can get a sense why a fort was put there if there's no fort there and there is no more fort left. But anyway, 29 forts and 3 batteries, and 19 of these 32 are in Virginia. So the Arlington line is really those forts I showed before, these two maps, all those forts, which I think are the most important parts of the CWDW, the heart of the Civil War defenses of Washington. It's really in Virginia. I think so. And other forts, like I said, are later renamed. Fort DeKalb is renamed. Fort Pennsylvania in this list here that I'm showing you, later named to Fort Reno, and Fort Massachusetts later renamed to Fort Stevens. And that is it. So we have some time for questions. And thank you very much for staying with me, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Brian. That was fantastic. Certainly learned a lot. And it's always fascinating to me the number of ways that we can tie back clips of the movie Gettysburg to things that feel not relevant at first glance. But then when you take the next dive there, that film holds obviously a special place for so many enthusiasts of the Civil War community. And yeah, I applaud you for finding another unique way to sort of put a twist on that. That was a good way to look at that. But yeah, all around fascinating stuff. So thank you.
And let me say, I know Gettysburg is a great movie for a lot of people. I enjoy the movie myself. I mean, I've learned a lot of things factual things about the battle that are not in the movie. And every time I listen to Chamberlain's speech to the Second Maine, I want to sign up. But no, I mean, it's one of those things. Like I said, a lot of people just don't know much about the Civil War defenses, and I think it's because no huge battle with a huge body count occurs there with these forts, except for the Battle of Fort Stevens, which was not on the level of Gettysburg or Antietam or anything like that. But that's all I'm saying. So anyway.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Reminder, everybody, if you do have a question, feel free to drop it into the chat. We do have a couple here that I'll read off for you, Brian. So Susan asks, do you know where Fort Albany was? In Alexandria, there is an Albany Avenue off of King Street.
Well, I don't know about, actually, that's news to me. Fort Albany, I believe, has one of the centennial signs. There are gray signs that are in Northern Virginia, which show where the forts were. And there's also one, I did a series called Friday's Fort. If all of you want to go on Facebook and all of you want to look up the Civil War Defenses of Washington Facebook page. And you can sort of like that and check it out. I did a series for, I guess, about a year and a half, whatever, called Friday's Fort, where I highlighted a fort a week. And I started with Fort Albany. It's the first one, I think the only one with the letter A. And there's a site that I use for many, which is the Historical Marker Database. It's hmdb.org. Great site. And it has forts like Fort Albany on there. And it'll show like where the map is, where the marker is, like on a map, on a Google map or whatever. And of course, you have directions to get to it. But that will like show you at least where it was. And there's only artist sketches of Fort Albany, no original pictures that survive of that fort. And so whether that fort was where the street is, I can't say. Might have run through somewhere, but of course, a street can run for several blocks. So anyway.
Rusty, thanks Rusty for joining us, one of our trusted board members. He asks, any forts around DC? Are there any forts around DC that still remain other than small remnants and historical markers that are good to visit? So visitation to these sites, how would you recommend?
My office is Battleground National Cemetery at 6625 Georgia Avenue Northwest. It's just, if you're coming, like, say, from Maryland, south on Georgia Avenue, once you hit in the DC border, it's like a couple minutes away from the DC Maryland border. But anyway, and there's 4 monuments out towards the front, towards the street. And there's a small grave circle. 40 men who died in the Battle of Fort Stevens are buried there. 41st was buried in 1936 who survived the battle. And the Superintendent's Lodge, which is where my office is at Battleground National Cemetery. However, you can visit it. You can go there, not right now because it's closed after dark. We're not in the office right now because we're dealing with some heating issues, but you can still go there on your own. But if you certainly wanted to contact me, I'll see if we can get my email to Cody somehow. We can see if we could, make arrangements to meet up with you if you come there. I'm not sure how long things are going to be out with the heat and such, but we can make that happen. Anyway, another fort is Fort Stevens, which is just down the street, about half a mile away from Battleground Cemetery. And by the way, on the 25th, if the weather holds up, I'm giving a walk from Fort Stevens to Battleground and going to give some interpretation. Also plan to do this in February and March, if the weather holds up for these things. Another fort is Fort DeRussy. It is pretty much intact. It's in Rock Creek Park, where Military Road and Oregon Avenue meet near St. John's, east of St. John's High School. So the marker is there if you know what you're looking for. And it's just a few minutes walk into the woods. And it's intact. There's no guns though. It's just basically the natural structure, the earthen structure is intact, but no guns, no buildings, none of that. So none of these forts exist like that. There is no, sorry to say, there is no Civil War Defenses of Washington fort that exists. It looks exactly like it did during the war, with structure, with cannon, with buildings and everything like that. It'd be great if there was, but there isn't. City had to grow up, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, I will say, excuse me. But the city had to grow up, and none of that was preserved to that point.
Speaking of Fort DeRussy, Peter asks, when was it built?
Fort DeRussy, It's either 61 or 62. Was it on that list? Um, I don't think I can go back to that list, but I think it's early enough in the war, 61 or 62. And it participated in the Battle of Fort Stevens in 1864, July 1864.
John, just with a comment, says, I enjoy Fort Foote with the two artillery pieces.
Yeah, I think it actually has three. They're very big 15-inch Rodman cannon, which are designed to just basically kill a ship with one shot, right on the banks of the Potomac.
You mentioned Fort Stevens. We had two back-to-back questions about 1864, obviously a little bit beyond your main topic this evening, but I'll throw them both to you here. Emily asked, did Early have a chance to take the Capitol building if he hadn't delayed attacking and his men weren't incapacitated? And then Dave asked about when General Grant starts using soldiers from these forts for the Overland campaign, how did they decide which forts to keep manned? So two concerns there for what's happening in 1864.
Well, for the first question, as I understand, the Confederates arrived first, but they were just exhausted. They'd had a big fight. They had to march all the way from Frederick, Maryland, where the Monocacy battle takes place in that area, to DC. And this is in July. So it's pretty brutal. They didn't know what Gatorade was back then or anything like that. They were pretty exhausted from it. They did have, some stuff to hydrate, of course, water and things like that. But it just really took its toll on them. And one of the things I've noticed with a number of Confederate assaults, maybe the Union had this somewhat, but a lot of times I've seen in cases where they're slowed down by basically food. They ran through the Union camp at Shiloh. They got slowed down by their food. They ran through the Union camp at Cedar Creek. They got slowed down by their food. They just said, there's stuff here to eat. I know it's kind of a famous tale story really that they broke into the cellars, I think, of who's that? Francis Preston Blair, the Blair Mansion in Silver Spring, which is right outside DC, and got hold of some milk and whatever else. I've heard the story that they were slowed down by ice cream. They got into a lot of soldiers, people back then, I guess, didn't know what ice cream was. So you know what happens when you eat ice cream too fast? Hmm. Some of these people thought that they were really in trouble, But anyway, I will say Jubal Early actually did see the Capitol Dome. And many of these soldiers were actually some of the first Americans to see the Capitol Dome because it had been completed the year before. But if he beat the 6th Corps to DC, but I know that by the time they got there, they saw the forts, and they were pretty impressed and said, wow, this is pretty massive. Look at those guns and everything like that. The other question about which soldiers to keep, I don't think I've ever really seen anything, and I have to say I'm not really sure. I've never really seen anything that said we'll keep this guys, but not those guys. Not knowing that this battle was going to take place, what they did was they emptied the forts enough, and they put in these 100-day men. They were basically kind of like the 3-month men at the beginning of the war. These men who would serve for 100 days, a lot of them coming from the Midwest, like Ohio and Illinois and such. And they sent them to DC to do this job of manning the forts. Also, by them, they had units like the Veteran Reserve Corps. So they're not expecting to see any action. Meanwhile, Grant gets all these soldiers. And then, of course, the Confederates show up, and then they send men right back to DC, or at least from the 6th Corps, back up to DC to meet that threat. They came up by ship, so they didn't have to march all the way from Virginia. Came up like in a day and a half. Amazing feat.
Emily asks, does Fort Tenallytown, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, have an annual event?
Well, it's Tenallytown during the war. It's Tenallytown today. I'm not sure why it changed. There was no Fort Tenallytown. The forts in the area, Um, I'm drawing a blank right now. I think Fort Craig's close to that area, but they don't really have an annual event. The annual event is the Battle of Fort Stevens commemoration, which takes place in July. It's usually the second Saturday in July. It's going to be July 12th, and it's usually like from about 10 uh, to about 3 o'clock or so. And that'll be in DC at the site of Fort Stevens. But does Tinleytown do anything specific? Not really, no.
Okay. We are at the hour mark. I'll close out with just one question that I had, sort of research related. Does it get confusing at all or muddle anything, the fact that these forts do change names in some instances? Do you see different references to the same fort, or soldiers who are referring to it as one thing after it changed? Does that complicate anything when you're looking at the records of these forts?
That's a good question. I really haven't seen much of complication, like somebody got confused or anything like that. I think I have seen occasions where soldiers have referred to it by the previous name, like they still called it Fort Massachusetts or something like that. And I think that could be understood if a soldier didn't know or something like that. But I haven't seen really where it caused much confusion. One last word about the forts, though, which I think is also interesting. There's one picture. If you Google the Second Rhode Island or I think Rhode Island troops DC 1861, there's a famous photo where it shows some Rhode Island soldiers in that very noticeable blouse that they had, which looks like a huge overshirt. Uh, they're with some young black men and boys and such. It's always interesting. It's usually a lot of those photos like that. You might have seen them camp photos where it shows the men in their militia uniforms or whatever early in the war. It's always young black boys. But anyway, I'm not sure what that's about. But many of them, would escape to these forts and look for the protection of soldiers. I know one case where they escaped to Fort Stevens, and Confederates, I think, came after him, and they're like, "You can't have him back." But to answer the previous question, I really haven't seen too much confusion.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian. The last thing that I'll ask of you as we sign off is, where can folks keep up with your work and the goings on at Defenses of Washington?
So, like I mentioned, great place is to you can visit the Facebook page, the Civil War Defenses of Washington. That's what it's called. I'm currently starting a series called Saturday Soldier. I'm done with Friday's Fort, so now I'm going to Saturday with Saturday Soldier. The second installment of that is going to be published tomorrow. It's a soldier named Lauriston Adkins of the 122nd New York Infantry, who fought at the Battle of Fort Stevens. So you're welcome to check that out. We also have, as I mentioned, our event, Fort Stevens Day. And we'll also be posting other events we do. So on the site, we talk about, the Civil War defenses. Also, it's a Civil War to Civil Rights site. So we do talk about things like that, make, commemorations for, months like Black History Month coming up, or Women's History and things like that. So please check it out. There's also organizations like the Alliance to Preserve the Civil War Defenses of Washington, which does a great job preserving the forts and telling the story. Arlington Historical Society is also involved in some things there too. So a lot of places where you can learn about this. But again, I just always encourage people. There's a lot. I know the big battles are important to a lot of people. But when you go beneath the surface of that and just learn some more things about DC during the Civil War, I think you can find out some really fascinating things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Brian. This was fantastic. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. No matter where you are, try to stay safe with winter weather, stay warm if you can, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all tonight.